chat kick in. But yeah, I use the screen recorder as well, and I'll put on my camera now. Right. So, and let's just, I've got a second screen here. So just with my notes, so that if I need to refer to anything. Right, so my name is Rodney Duffett. I'm from the marketing department, and I've been working at CPUT. I started part-time in 1998, so it's going on to almost 25 years, my association with CPUT. So yeah, I've been here quite a while. And so I think let's just go to the presentation where I will give a bit of background. Hi, Simone. You're in on the right day now, I see. Sorry for the mix-up. Right. Okay. So let's go to the PowerPoint presentation just to double check that you can see the PowerPoint presentation okay. Writing for publication for students and staff 2022, that's what it says. If I could just check either Jane or Simone, if you can see the screen.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So a lot of people asked me to record this presentation. So I did the same presentation last year, or more or less the same. Obviously, you never present the same topic in exactly the same way. But here is the YouTube link from last year. I am recording this presentation, and I will place it on YouTube as well as Blackboard for the students that have access to Blackboard. And this presentation I have uploaded on Blackboard already, but I will upload it again with the YouTube video link for 2022. But some people contacted me and said they can't make it, and so I just sent them last year's link so that they could, watch the presentation. So as I've already introduced myself, Rodney Duffett, marketing department, all my details, ResearchGate, Google Scholar, my ORCID ID. Yeah, so those are all my credentials. So let's get started. So firstly, I need to just say that I'm not a total guru in writing journal articles. I still learn from each submission. I think I'm just going to take my camera off in case I need to scratch my nose or something like that. So let's just go back in. Okay. So yeah, I learn from each submission, each revision I receive, each acceptance I receive, and each rejection I receive. I also learn when I publish with new co-authors. Many of them are students, staff from overseas, international collaborations, research collaborations, and partnerships. Personally, I'm on 39 journal articles, and I have another couple more accepted. So I'm just passing 40 journal articles, most of which, in fact, all but 3 have been published in the last 7 to 8 years. So I'm still a novice in terms of publications, whereas you have people that have been publishing articles for 30 years already. So I'm still relatively new at it. But yeah, I'm gaining experience as I go along. I also just want to highlight that the reference list at the end serves as additional reading. So I kind of used my academic prowess and my personal experience to write this workshop. So by no means am I the bee's knees. There's whole textbooks on this topic, and I could have written a textbook on this topic. So this is just an overview of what I've learned and what I've gleaned and what I deem important. This workshop is also aimed at new researchers, so not the experienced researchers will, they'll be able to teach me. It's directly aimed at students and colleagues that are just beginning with the research process. There's a number of different topics that I would cover. So typical topics I'm going to cover is publish or perish, types of periodical, the general structure of a research article, the writing process, blocks to write in, selecting the right journal, the peer review process, and dealing with rejection. As I mentioned already, this is the YouTube link from last year's video. I will update this and put it on Blackboard with the new YouTube link from this presentation. I also wrote a paper on this presentation, and a full paper, it's 15 pages, so it will give you basically what I'm saying and a bit more. And here is, I placed it on ResearchGate, and it's doing fairly well. I think more than 1,000 people have downloaded it and read it. So the purpose is to help, people that are new to research. So let's start with the first topic, which is publish or perish. What is publish or perish? Well, I'm just moving my notes on here. Basically, it's the expression to describe the importance that academic staff need to write in order to advance their academic careers. And so academics are often associated with research, and if you want to move up in the ranks, research can help you get there. Now, I can tell you CPUT, or back in the Pentech days and Cape Technicon days, was not focused on research. They were typically focused on teaching activities, but yeah, since they merged, and we've become a university, they've become much more focused on research activities. Likewise, my story for 15 years, I focused purely on teaching. And while I was busy with my master's degree, I managed to publish 3 articles. And I only really started to become involved in research in the later stages of my doctorate study. So I've only really been involved in research for, you can say, 7.5 years. That's when I became interested. And yeah, it's very difficult initially when you start, if you've got a full teaching load and now you still want to become involved in research. My typical day is 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'm sure to take one day off where I don't open a computer. It's important to get a bit of rest. So for me, that day is Sunday where I don't open a computer. However, and that hasn't changed now with COVID. Your working hours just seems to extend even more, although now we're saving on traveling time. But, the problem is you at home the whole day, working the whole day is also not a good recipe. For me to travel to work was my break, travel time. But anyway, after about 5 to 6 years of very hard work, I started to develop a track record in research, and I managed to get a little bit of teaching relief. And although I'll never stop teaching, I still teach postgraduate and undergraduate students. And yeah, so now I'm a little bit more involved in research than what I was, and I had a little bit of respite in terms of teaching, so it's given me just a little bit more time. But the problem is, it is, as a lecturer, I always first attend to my own students' needs, my postgraduate and my undergraduate students' needs, and only then, whatever time's left over after all the CPUT meetings and other workshops and committees that you get involved in, then it goes to research. And most of that time is weekends, during my holidays. That is when most people are going away having fun. I'm busy with my research. So yeah, the story. A mechanic's car's always falling apart, a doctor's often ill, and so a lecturer as well often neglects their own study and research at the cost of everyone else. Right, so that's sort of my little story. Now, to publish is very important for postgraduate students, and hence the reason, and not only for academics, but for students. So as a master's student, you have to submit an article to an accredited journal, which we'll speak a bit about later, about the DHET accredited journals. And as a doctorate student, you need to have an article accepted by a DHE accredited journal before you graduate. So it's quite important for you as well, and not just staff to go further. It's also important if you want to apply for ConfCom funding. There are certain requirements. So for example, if you're a doctorate student and you want to go on a conference, fortunately enough, you don't need to have a track record if you're a master student. But if you're a doctorate student, you already have to have 0.025 of research outputs. So, and if you finished your doctorate, then you need half a unit. So where do you get these research output units? Well, it's quite simple. If you publish an article in a DHET accredited journal, which we'll get to later, and you're the only author, you will get 1 full research output unit. If there are 2 authors, it's split between you, and you each get 0.5 of a unit. If you attend a DHET accredited conference and you present a paper and you're the sole author, you get 0.5 of a unit, and if there's 2 authors, you get 0.25, and so it gets divided up further. If you publish a book chapter, that's also worth 1 full research unit if you're the sole author, and for each subsequent author, it just gets divided by the number of authors. The key is DHET accredited, and we'll get to that later. Other reasons for publishing: obviously you want to make a contribution to existing knowledge, you want to validate yourself as a scholar, you want to receive national or international recognition, you may want to travel, for example, to conferences and see the world. You can do that if you're into that. You want to build professional networks, secure research funding, self-learning. It also looks good on your CV that you've had some articles published. And obviously, quite frankly, and this never grows old, it's quite exhilarating when your article gets accepted and you see your name, on the website, and you see that other people are reading your article. And even better, you see that other people are citing your article. Makes it quite exciting. So, types of periodicals. So, firstly, we start off with consumer or popular publications. These are your typical magazines, consumer and business marketing magazines. It's a wide range of topics. They're typically short little articles written by staff writers or freelancers. They're there for entertainment. There's a lot of advertising them, promoting products. There's lots of pictures and photos. A lot of these that used to be physical copies are now online formats, and it's aimed at a very broad audience. And these are the typical magazines that you buy in a supermarket. So is that a good place for academic research? No. Okay, but it's just to distinguish. Then you receive house journals, and there's 3 categories: external, in-house, and mixed. So external is aimed at external stakeholders, like shareholders, or people you want to attract investment or create goodwill with, maybe amongst the government. In-house is aimed generally at your staff and management, and mixed is aimed at both. And these house journals provide institutional news and information. A typical example is we had the CPUT Bulletin, which used to be a physical magazine. Also, I think it was called at one stage the Mojo magazine, and this has now moved to an online format. Is it a good place to publish academic research? The answer is no. It's better, you could create publicity about a research project that you're involved in, but it's not good to actually publish your research. What we are interested in is academic journals. Now, these journals are very focused on very specific topics. They're generally quite long articles, which could be anywhere from 5 to 30 pages. They provide greater depth of information on the latest developments and on original research. In other words, they're providing new knowledge. They're aimed at very specialized audiences like academics, students, researchers, scientists, professionals, industry specialists. There's also various journal categories. For example, original research articles, which is mostly the most common type of article and the type of article that you would write as a student or a staff member, but there's book reviews, projects, theoretical, technical articles, conference proceedings, case studies, review papers, and letters. But the most common form is the original research article that you would write. Now, these articles are peer evaluated by fellow academics from around the world, and they look at it in terms of originality, scholarly value, and academic soundness. And yeah, the typical format of a journal article, and we will cover each of these later, is the abstract, introduction, literature review, research methodology, findings, results, discussions, conclusion, and reference list. So your typical format of a thesis is the same generally as a journal article, except a journal article is much, much shorter, which actually it's often difficult to write less than it is to write more. Now, the question is, why do universities want their students and their staff members to publish? Well, if you publish in a DHET accredited journal, then you receive a subsidy. The university receives a subsidy from the government if you claim it, and you need to claim that research on Converus Clavariate, and you need to write it up. Usually the colleague, the academic, writes it up and then claims that research. It's submitted to DHET, and 2 years later, the university receives that funding, and some of that funding would go to the faculty, the university, and some of that funding would go to the academic, and then that money could be used for further research, or, you know, even paying for your students' language editing fees or something. That's what I tend to use my subsidy for a lot. So that's why they want you to publish, is because they get some subsidy from it. It's, as I say, I was speaking about DHET accredited journal indexes, and there's a CPT link which I provided you in this PowerPoint presentation below, this link here, which provides the list of all the different journal articles. But I can tell you now, I double checked this link yesterday and it's out of date. They're giving you the 2019 list. So on Blackboard, I placed the very latest DHET accredited journal list, which was circulated to us by CPGS. And so I put the 2022 list on Blackboard under my presentation. So you can download the very latest link. So it's very important to publish in journals in those lists. Now, just in the Scopus list, I think there's more than 25,000 journals that you can select from, and that's excluding the other lists. So the main lists of Scopus, Web of Science, which is also known as ISI, the International Biography of Social Sciences, named as IBSS, Norwegian, then there's a DHT, Department of Higher Education and Training. So those are typically South African journals. There's a silo list and there's DOAJ list. Now the DOAJ list only got added about 2 years ago, and that's also a very, very long list. I'm not quite sure how many journals are listed there, but also tens of thousands. And the good news about DOAJ is that those journals, that's sort of the bottom list. It's even less than DHET journals. And so because you got that extra list, it makes it easier to find a journal that is accredited. So if you're not going for top journals, then have a look at the DOAJ list. And there's tens of thousands of journals there that are mostly Eastern European type journals, and they're a bit easier to get published in, but obviously the standard is not very high. Right. Just before I continue, there are also a lot of journals that aren't on the DHET list, and they're not classified as predatory journals. In other words, there's quite a rigorous process before a journal can get listed to become indexed on one of the indexes, such as Scopus or DOAJ. Even DOAJ is not very, good quality journals necessarily. There's still a rigorous progress you have to go to. And so there are a lot of journals you could publish in that aren't on the list, but the problem is you get no subsidy for it and CPUT doesn't recognize it. So I don't recommend you publish in journals that aren't listed on DHET. That's just a tip. And then the fourth classification of journals is your predatory journals. Now, predatory journals exploit the publish or perish phenomenon. They know that you want to that they want academics to publish, so they'll bombard you with emails and whatnot and say, oh, come publish with us, we've got high impact factors. Meantime, that's not their motivation. They have little benefit to you. They become predatory either because they're intentionally predatory and they want to make money, or because of maladministration, inexperience, and negligence. Their main aim is to make money via page fees. They make phony claims. So, yeah, we've got a high impact factor. Meantime, they've got no impact factor. They publish poor quality papers due to little substandard and no peer review and editing. And few manuscripts are rejected, if ever. They have very fast acceptance and very quick publication process. So those are their typical characteristics. There are harmful consequences of you publishing in predatory journals because there's a sub-peer review process. It could tarnish your image as well, or be harmful to your reputation. It receives little exposure, low readership, and few citations, and the whole journal could just disappear suddenly. So it's not good to publish in those type of journals. And there's various lists. The most common list is Beale's list. So if you see journals appearing in this, you would avoid them. But even better is don't look at what's in the predatory list. Rather just go to the DHET list and find journals listed there. You just got to be careful though that some predatory journals clone reputable journals. So you need to make, in other words, they pretend to be another journal and they're not. So you need to make quite sure that you just check that the ISSN number or ISNBN number is correct. So yeah, my tip is only publish in DHET accredited journals. There's literally over 50,000 journals that are accredited, so you've got enough to choose from. Okay. So let's go to just the generic research article structure, and then we'll just take a little break because I need to put that link up for you so that you can write it down and just sign the attendance register. But we'll do so after this section. So what is the typical structure of a research article? And it's very close to that of a thesis. So yeah, just see. Yeah. So the first obviously important element is the title. This needs to be clear, specific, accurate, and unambiguous, and include the main keywords and subject contents, because this is basically what tempts people to read further based on the actual title. It's an advertisement for your research, and it should include a sufficient number of words to identify what the topic is actually about, so that whether people want to read further or not, but should avoid technical jargon and abbreviations that people don't understand if you're just a lay person wanting to read the journal article. There is also a journal word limit, so sometimes they say no more than 15 words. And if you go over that, then they're going to kick out your submission. So just take that into consideration. The second point is an abstract, which basically is the second potential endpoint. So if your abstract's not good and people read that, and I do that, I'll read the title, I'll read the abstract, then I say, no, this article's not related to what I'm interested in. So it summarizes the main sections of your article, which typically include the research problem, methodology, main results, and conclusions in a single paragraph. It's very important for index purposes as well. So people are searching for your article. Often people search in the title and abstract. So all your keywords need to be in the abstract so that people can find your research. There are also generally no references in the abstract for a journal article, and it's also usually written last. Once you've written the article, then it's a summary of your article. It's typically 150 to 300 words, and there are also sometimes structured abstracts where it's not one paragraph. Emerald uses this, for example. It's broken up into 5 to 8 elements. For example, the purpose, the design, methodology, approach, or the findings and results, the research limitations, the practical and theoretical or social implications, and originality and value are typical elements that go in the structured abstracts. Another important element is keywords, and these days they actually want you to give keywords in your thesis as well after the abstract, which is very important for index services. It also labels your manuscript, but by index services, just by the way, when people search for it, they also search in the keywords. And so if, it helps people find relevant research. Avoid using words with wide-ranging meanings because it's not going to help anyone, and only use well-known abbreviations. Generally, people write things out in full. One of the most important sections in a journal article is the introduction, which basically provides the background to the research study and typically includes the context, purpose, and rationale, an overview of the research problem, questions, and hypothesis. It also provides the primary theoretical underpinning, possible solutions and limitations, and most importantly, it provides the research gaps. In other words, this is equivalent in your research proposal and thesis to the background to the research problem. It basically saying, why is your research necessary? What gaps have other researchers noted? And how are you going to fill these gaps? And basically, what model are you going to use as the basis for your research? And typically, it also usually ends with giving the main aim of your research. Then this section leads into your literature review, which is pretty much similar to that in your thesis, except it's much, much shorter. If you've got a 30, 40-page literature or 50-page literature review in a journal article, this is like 5 pages or 6 pages. And the literature review, or also known as the theoretical framework, comprises of various sections. It comprises of the background to the research. In other words, where is the research located? It provides an overview of the actual topic. It provides past and current research. It provides the theoretical conceptual framework, and it often ends with your research objectives, questions, hypothesis, and your conceptual model. There's also a number of questions that you need to take into consideration when writing your literature review. So it should reflect on information from other studies by addressing the problems that they stated on similar issues. It should also ensure that appropriate literature has been examined to provide the background and the rationale to the problem. It should also speak about the research gaps in existing literature. It should provide an adequate theoretical framework, and this is where a lot of journal articles go wrong. They just have findings, but it's not based on any theoretical framework or model. Has the author taken the review of the literature as a mechanical task with no contribution? So it's not just cutting and pasting what other people said. You need to add your own voice to that. So they said this person said this. So what does this mean? You need to add your own voice. And this is one of the most difficult things that I do struggle with my students and myself, is to add your own voice to what other people have said. And the literature obviously needs to correspond and substantiate your research objectives, questions, and hypothesis. But this is pretty much standard practice, as would be in a thesis. So it is in a journal article, just greatly abbreviated. Then the next section, like your thesis, is a research methodology. So the methodology should provide the readers with sufficient detail so that they can replicate the study. It should provide detailed information of how the problem was investigated, the methods and material, the data collection process, and the ethical consideration should also be considered. It's the cornerstone of the manuscript, which provides a concise overview of the research methodology and design during the research process. It generally includes the following sections: the paradigm, the method or approach, the design, the sampling, the data collection, a description of your research instruments, which could be a questionnaire or a semi-structured interview guide. It should provide an overview of how the data was collected, how the data was coded and analyzed. It could also provide the delimitations and delimitations, and then, as I said, the ethical considerations. So all the things that would go in a thesis would be a mini version that went in the research methodology section. Then you get to the findings section, which is my favorite part. I really enjoy writing this section the most always, and as a thesis as well. When you get your findings, that's the best. The problem is writing the literature and the discussion afterwards is not what I enjoy, but the findings is always, in any research, to me, the highlight. So your findings should be clear and succinct and should provide an objective overview of the main results. It should also highlight unforeseen results that you do not expect. It should provide robust statistical analysis, which includes reliability and validity measures, and particularly for quantitative research. And this is a big problem. A lot of research doesn't do any validity and reliability tests like the Cronbach alpha, the composite reliability in terms of validity, the average variance extracted, the factor loadings, and then you get Fornau and Lacker's discriminant validity test, where you take the square root of the AVE value, which should be greater than the correlations of the individual constructs. So, you know, that should be in almost all quantitative research, and it's often lacking. Also, you generally do not discuss the findings in the findings chapter. So findings is separate, and then your discussion chapter, you discuss the findings. But in a lot of qualitative studies, I've just added this footnote, that often makes more sense to combine your findings and discussion section. So often you say this participant said that participant said that, then it makes sense to add in some literature and then add your own voice. So this is what other people say, and therefore this is what we think based on that. So I must say, a lot of the qualitative articles, in fact, the journals have often said, please combine your discussion and findings. So that is, but quantitative, generally you keep it separate. Then discussion section, basically it should provide a concise and informative overview of the research, which corresponds with the introduction and the results. It should explain, analyze, interpret, and discuss the most significant relationships, generalizations, and results in comparison with other published research. So basically you're saying, we found this, this is what other people found, and then you add your own voice. Then you need to ask, why are our findings similar, or why are our findings different? So you're comparing your results with other people, and then you add in your own voice. And that's really what discussion is about. So it's important to do a good literature review with the view of finding literature on everything that you found, because then it makes your discussion section that much easier. The conclusions should basically clearly show the impact of the research, link the findings to the main objectives, make theoretical contributions for education, research, and new frameworks, highlight the theoretical contributions of the research, highlight the practical and managerial implications, as well as provide details in terms of the limitations of the research and recommendations for future research. So basically, in this section, you are answering or concluding what you found in terms of your hypothesis and research questions and objectives. You basically want to say, this was my objective, so therefore we can conclude this. This was the hypothesis, therefore we can conclude this. This is how we can apply it based on the theoretical model we used. This is how managers and people in industry can use the research. And limitations are, these are the problems with the research, but this is what future research could then focus on. And the limitations and recommendations and future research section is very important for you when you're starting with the research topic. I always tell my students, go and read the limitations and recommendations for future research section in journal articles that are related to your research, because they then identify research gaps which you can use to justify your research. Likewise, if you also read the introduction of journal articles, that also identifies gaps which can be used to justify your own research. So it's a very important section. Then you also the acknowledgement section. So here you basically list in people that have assisted with the research, financial funders, institutional supporters, consultants, approvals, material suppliers, proofreaders, technical support staff, participants and respondents, and a potential conflict of interest. So it's very important if you receive financial funding from a certain organization and they link to your research, it's important to disclose that information because it could be a potential conflict of interest. Then they know that there's a potential for bias because, you know, in a lot of medical research in particular, they're funded by the, you know, the people that sell those products. So, you know, what's the chances that there is no conflict of interest? You know, you have to disclose that because it's not if an independent researcher conducted research on these products, these findings could be very different from someone who's actually funded by the company itself. So that's why it's important to include that type of information. The reference list, what's very important to note is that, the reference style is different from journal to journal to journal. CPUT has a certain style, so does each publishing house. Emerald has a style, Elsevier has a style, IndeScience has a style, Wiley has a style. A lot of them use APA, but a lot of them have their own weird and wonderful and strange style. Others of them use numbers for your in-text referencing. So the first in-text reference you use is number 1. The next one you use is number 2. And if you use number 1 later on it's still labeled number 1. So it differs from journal to journal. So you have to be quite a chameleon in changing your reference styles. Also, it's not good to cite too many of your own publications and too many publications from that same journal. But I always say it's, as you'll see later, it's good to include a couple of journal articles from the journal that you're submitting to, and we'll discuss that later. There are referencing tools that can help you, Mendeley, RefWork, EndNotes. Personally, I do all my references manually. It's a pain in the butt, but I also struggle with these programs because sometimes you just want to change one little thing and you can't, and then you're stuck. So I still do it manually, but a lot of people use Mendeley, and you know, good. It's good. It can save you a lot of time. It's also important to note that it's not a bibliography. You must include a reference list. The bibliography would include all sources that you read but did not necessarily cite, whereas a reference list includes all the sources that you cited in the journal itself. So yeah, so you include in a reference list. And
Prof, can you repeat that again for me, please?
The difference between a bibliography and a reference list.
Yeah. Just want to get it once more time. Yeah.
So a bibliography includes all the sources that you read. So you could have read 50 different sources, but you did not cite them as an in-text reference. So you may have cited 30 of them in the journal article, in the thesis, but in a bibliography, you would list all 50. In a reference list, you may have read 50 sources, but you only cited or in-text referenced 30 in the body of the journal article or thesis. So therefore, in the reference list, you would only list those 30. So you got it.
Yes, sir.
Great. So only those that you cited and in-text referenced. So you must see it in the body of the text. Then it goes in the reference list. If you did not cite it, but you read it, it does not go in the reference list. Also very important is that most journal articles, they want the reference list alphabetical, but if they're a system that uses numeric numbers, then it gets listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's a number in front of each reference, and that's based on the order that you in-text referenced it. But most journals want them alphabetical. Right. Then support materials. So a lot of journals these days want you to send them your questionnaires, your data sets, your statistical analysis, your video and your audio material. So sometimes they also want you to send that. Right, this is a good place to pause and for me to catch my breath. Unfortunately, none of you can see the chat. So I've been instructed or asked to take a class register because CPUT needs this for reporting, for their BEE reporting. It's 4 questions that will take you 30 seconds to complete the form. So this is the form. If you can maybe take a screenshot of it, just, control screenshot and paste it, because I can't put it in the chat so that you can just click on the link, or you can just write this down and then please complete it. It'll take you 30 seconds. So I'll leave this on the screen, and I think it's a good stage. This is a good we're 2/3 of the way through the presentation, or maybe more, 80% through the presentation. Where am I? Let's just see. We are, we're halfway through the presentation. So are there any questions? I'm just going to leave this screen on so you can write it down at this stage, and I'll just take questions for a few minutes, and then we'll continue with the rest of the presentation, but I want to give people time to take this down. I can't see any hands or anything, so you can just talk if there were any questions thus far. We really are going to get to the nitty-gritty now. What I've covered now is really just the overview, and you're going to get more of the practical component in the second half of the presentation. Any questions? Okay, I'll just give you another minute to take this down, and then we'll continue with the next half. Right, hopefully that's enough time for you. Can I proceed?
Yes, Prof, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. Right, so now we're on to the writing process itself. Okay, and before you start writing, it's very important to refer to the author's guidelines of a specific journal. So each journal will provide you with author guidelines so that you can assess or adhere to the journal's audience, scope and aims, structure, formatting, referencing style, length restrictions, and other requirements. So you need to look at those specific elements. I'll just ask everyone to mute themselves. I am picking up a little bit of background noise, so just check that you are on mute. So yeah, the author guidelines are key, that particularly their referencing and their structure and their formatting, and also their scope and aim. So what's the aim of this journal? What is the scope? You need to take that into consideration. Now, several authors, Fisher and Van Dam, if you go and download the full paper I wrote, you can get the references. recommend a certain order in writing your research. And I agree with this order because I follow it myself. So start off with the tables and figures. I'll just highlight it. Start off writing the tables and figures. Then move to the methodology. How did you collect the data and the results section itself and the discussion sections? Then go to the introduction, literature, conclusion, and then you end off with the title and abstract. And kind of that is what I do myself. I also use that format and I just find it works well for me. But ultimately, you need to decide what works best for yourself. I just want to see. Okay. So also important, you can't write an article from start to finish. You have to work on specific sections. So you can't just start, usually write the abstract, introduction, literature review, method, unless you've got, of course, your thesis and you're writing an article from your thesis, then you can. But if you're starting from, you know, like your thesis as well, yeah, then you can sort of, you know, then you've already done the research. It's just about abbreviating, and we'll speak about that later. But you need to decide what works best from you. What I do is, and this is my personal, is if I want to write for a specific journal, I download articles from that journal to get a feel, and I read and I download obviously articles related to my topic that I could cite as well. And I read those articles to get a feel for those journals and their style and their formatting requirement and how they write. And I say generally cite one or two of those articles just to show the journal, look here, I'm submitting my article to you because there are other articles related to my research, and those articles expressed a need for additional research and showed certain research gaps. So therefore I'm submitting my article to you. So I'm trying to, you know, show that the article is relevant. Then, yeah, also seek constructive criticism, get feedback from experienced researchers, from colleagues, mentors, you know, people that you know, so get people to, you know, get their opinion, bounce ideas off them. Also, I see it's cut off a little bit in this presentation. You can probably just see language editing. So that's important as well. If English is not your first language, or it's not a strong point, like for me, it's not a strong point, my language, then it's good to get your article language edited. Now, when I first started writing, every journal article that I submitted, I got language edited. These days, I don't worry as much, but it's important just to make a good impression, because sometimes they could reject your article just because of poor language, not because of the poor research. Publishing from a thesis. So this is very, very important. Many articles emanate from a thesis, but often by the time you're ready to publish from it, your literature is already 2 years old. So it's very important to conduct a fresh literature review. So that you have the latest literature. I review for a lot of journals, and in just about every review, if I'm reviewing an article now and I see there's no 2022 sources, I'm saying, sorry, it's 9 months into the year. There must be more recent research published on your topic. Go and do a fresh literature review. So that's, in fact, just before you submit your thesis, you should actually do a quick search to see if you can't find the latest articles. When I examine theses, I also do a quick search and see, okay, I just take keywords from the title and I do a research. And if I find a whole bunch of articles that they have not considered since the time they submitted their thesis, then I'm saying, sorry, you need to go and add recent literature. So that's very, very important. Right, the journal word limit. So this is also another problem. It's not just a cut and paste from your thesis, because your thesis could be 100,000 words, and now you could write for a journal that wants 3,000 words. And most journals, typical journal word limit is 3,000 to 10,000, but I would say 3,000 to 7,000 is the most common. That's not a lot of space. So you really need to extract the essence of your topic and be sure also to provide a number of recent and relevant sources to justify your topic's merit, as I said before. You also need to take the audience, so who are the readers? You need to take the language and writing style of the journal. That's why I say it's always good to read the journal as well, because your writing style in the thesis may be very different. You need to also consider the originality and the findings' significance, because most journal articles would just reject you point blank if your research is not original. Your methodology depth, so you don't have a lot of space to write a lot about your methodology, so you really have to write it succinctly, and the amount of detail required to delineate your topic. So yeah, I often choose a journal based on how many words they allow you, because I'm a person that really struggles to write, short versions. So I prefer to write for a journal that wants 10,000 words as opposed to a journal that wants 3,000 words. But some of you may be the opposite, and it could be quite daunting for you to write 10,000 words and you'd prefer 3,000 words. So that's a big thing that's the biggest thing for me, is actually the word limit. Then also your article submission. Now you need to consider, something else as well is authorship. So generally the students, if it's a student supervised article, the student's the first author, but it depends on how much work people have done. So often my students graduate, they're not worried about the journal article at all. They've graduated, they've submitted an article. Now feedback comes, they're not interested, they've graduated already. That's for master students. So then I have to write it afterwards, and I have to relive the thesis, and I have to do all the literature again, and I've done that for a lot of students. Then, sorry, I'm the first author because I've done more of the work. So not that it really matters in the scheme of the things, most students just want to graduate, but yeah, so whoever does the most work should be the first author. Also, article submission. So for a master's thesis student, they just need to submit a journal article. But for a doctorate study, you need to get an article accepted. So it's very important to actually start writing an article while you're busy on the thesis. So when you're far enough into your thesis to write an article, you need to do that as soon as possible, because as you'll see later, some journals take a very, very long time to get back to you. Which we'll speak about more later. Then also I just had to add a section on publishing ethics. So the biggest there's a number of problems or potential ethical problems, and I'll just list them. Plagiarism is one. Duplicate submissions is another. Research data falsification, so making up your own data. Authorship, conflict of interest, research results misuse, and reviewer bias are problems. But let's just discuss some of them. So plagiarism is most common. It's when it counts for half of ethical cases, and this is copying other people's work and not referencing them. It's also, if you paraphrase other people's work, you still need to reference it. Just because you change the words, wherever you got the idea from, you need to, even if you just get an idea from someone's research, you can in-text reference them. So it's very important to always cite other people's work. You can use Turnitin or Blackboard as ways, as not as a punitive measure, but it helps you write. So Turnitin will highlight where you've taken source from. Then you need to add other sources, so multiple, merge it together, change the words, change the order, and add your own voice and mix it up. And so Turnitin kind of helps you write, really. It's a developmental tool. It's not a punitive tool. So use it to your advantage, as with all other anti-plagiarism software. Okay, also in terms of duplicate, so research data falsification, I won't talk about. It's people making up their own data. Duplicate submissions or publications. So you are not allowed to submit your same manuscript to more than one journal at a time. You can only submit it to one journal at a time, so that's very important. authorship. Another problem I has is often people just want their name on the research. And I know where my wife works, people that have very little to do with it, they've had nothing to do with it, and they just read it afterwards. And because they're the boss, they just put their name on the paper or whatever. And that's also very, very unethical. And I'll name it at Stellenbosch University, but it's not just limited to them. It's all universities, people in authority. A lot of these big researchers put their name on other people's research, and they've had very little to do with it. So that's, yeah. Other unethical issues I can just speak about is financial aspects, which you mentioned. So if a company is sponsoring the research, it's very important to name that. So yeah, but name them, because that could introduce bias into the actual research. Blocks to write in. So let's go on to this section. So all scholars experience some form of writing anxiety or writer blocks due to, a new subject matter, unfamiliar structure, international audience, or, I experience writing block. Often I've written an article halfway and I do everything in my power not to get back to that article after, often then it gets busy. My students are submitting work and there's meetings. And so I haven't got back to an article for 2 weeks, and now I've got to carry on working on it. But, you experience some anxiety. And so I've had an article like that, which I wrote half of it, and I got back to it for the first time in 3 weeks because things got busy. But, there were other days where I could have got back to it, but, I don't like, if I can't dedicate a lot of time to it, I don't want to start it again. So I started it yesterday, and of course today I haven't got back to it again. So yeah, everyone experiences blocks to write in. So the first step to overcome anxiety or writer's block is to recognize that obviously everyone experiences this, no matter how experienced they are. And tools to get started with writing is, and a few tips are, and these are got from various people. You'll see if you download the paper from ResearchGate, the authors, but write everything on one page, brainstorm your ideas, ask why, who, what, when, how, where questions, group and cluster ideas together, assess the possible negatives and positives, and interests in columns. So yeah, put everything else in one page, just get it out there, and then start working on the sections a bit more. A tip that, and there's lots of other things you can do. You can argue for ideas and against ideas. There's an acronym called SCAMPER, which means substitute, combine, adapt, modify, magnify, minify, put another to use, eliminate, reverse, or rearrange. So there's lots of tips, and I'll provide that into the paper, but write everything on one page. Another tip, and this is a tip that I really like, is summarize one journal article a day. And this is what I tell my master's and doctorate students. So download a whole lot of research from the different databases. I did do a workshop on how to search the databases earlier in the year. That's in Blackboard. It's called Search and Topic Selection and the Research Proposal. So you'll see that on Blackboard, where I show you how to search. But so find 50 to 100 journal articles, and then summarize that article. And how I summarize the article is by placing it in a table. And I use the following headings. I have a list of the authors. Then I have the next list is the purpose, aims, and objectives. The next column is what is the major research methodology. So is it quantitative, qualitative? I also put where it was conducted, who were the respondents, how many respondents are there. So all of those are good for potential research gaps, particularly if everyone's using one type of methodology, you could use a different type of methodology. Then I have another column with the main findings relating to the research topic. And then I have another topic called limitations and research gaps. And this I extract from the introduction and the limitations and future research sections and identify gaps so that when I'm ready to write, then I can say, oh, these are all the gaps this article mentioned. And, you know, if you summarize like 50 articles and now you find in common gaps, you can then go to your introduction section and say, wow, these 10 authors said, you know, there's a need for more research in developing countries. These authors said that different methodologies should be used. And so you can easily then write your introduction. And so if you just summarize one journal article a day, in 100 days, you have 100 articles. So in just a bit over 3 months, you could have 100 summaries. And that's enough to write a thesis. It's enough to write a journal article. So yeah, I say when eating the elephant, take one bite at a time. And also those journals, you can look at their reference list, and in their reference list, you can find other articles that you had not found, and you can search for those articles, and then you would get more articles. So yeah, that is another thing, is if you read enough and you can create a table like that, it makes it very easy to write a journal article. And when I write those summaries, I immediately write it in my own words, add my own voice and insight into it so that it's ready to use when I'm actually ready to write a journal article. Then, yeah, the relevant references, that's what I was talking about. Looking at reference lists and extracting sources from that. Then also don't try and do too much. Write, you know, you can write, you know, if you think you need to write a manuscript of 5,000 words, you could, you know, be very afraid. So just write 250 or 500 words a day. Sometimes I spend the whole day, like, you know, 7 or 8 hours, and all I've got to show for it is one paragraph, you know, one paragraph of a couple of 100 words. You think, gosh, is that all I've done today? But you've got that one paragraph, and in writing that paragraph, you've had to read a lot. And then, you know, you may find other days where you can write much more. So it's just writing a bit each day. And I say, even if it's just summarizing a journal article, then later when you put them together, it becomes easier. There's also a lot of workshops that offer free online training. So Elsevier offers workshops. Wiley offers workshops. In fact, I advertised that to my postgraduate students, a Wiley workshop. Emerald also offers workshops. There's also breakaway workshops. I know Stellenbosch University has a lot of writing breakaways. I know CPUT's actually got some writing breakaways and workshops planned. I also see it's cut off a bit, but the last point says consult experienced researchers as well. So, you know, your supervisors, the people that are closely involved in your research can also help you. Now we're getting into quite some nitty gritty, and this is probably the most important aspect, or very important aspect, is selecting the right journal. So just some general tips. First thing you need to do is, as I say, download the author guidelines and then look at the scope and aims of the journal. Look at the type of articles that are being published. So download those articles, read those articles. Do they correspond with your type of research and your writing style? Who is the readership? So who is the main audience? Is it a local journal? Is it international? Also, consider the current trending topics. Does your research match the latest trending topics, or is your research old and you find 10 other articles that have done exactly what you've done? Then, you know, you may have a problem publishing in that specific journal. Additionally, as I say, refer to the author guidelines, as I say. Yeah, speak to other experienced colleagues, search the DHET accredited databases to establish the journals that best match your topic. And the best way to really find a suitable journal is to look at your own reference list. So if you're writing from your thesis, you go to your reference list and see what journals did you cite a lot. And if you cited certain journals come up, you know, there may be 4 or 5 journals that you used extensively, then you should be looking at those 4 or 5 journals as, yeah, a possible avenue to publish. Other factors to consider is who's the editorial board, the impact factor. So high impact factor journals sometimes are difficult to publish. The journal metrics, So how many reads? Is it well read? The international standing. Who are the major scholars there? Do they take original content, the peer revision or review, the acceptance and rejection rate? So, you know, if you're a new author and this journal is rejecting 98% of what it receives and only publishing 2%, that's not the journal you should be going for, because it's most likely a very high impact factor journal, and you know, very experienced people are getting rejected. Obviously, if you've got a very experienced co-author with you who could be your co-supervisor, then yes. But if you by yourself and you're a new author, yeah. Also, you've got to consider the typical time to publication, which we will speak about a bit more later. What are the page fees? Is it open access? And have you maybe previously published in this journal? So yeah, those are other factors to consider. My personal experience is that and then, sorry, this descending the stairs is basically saying that, you know, a lot of researchers descend the stairs. So they start by first submitting to a top journal. Then if they get rejected there, they go to a field-specific top journal. If they get rejected there, they just go to another field-specific journal. And if they get rejected there, they go to a national journal. So in other words, you start at the top and you go to the bottom. I must say that, you know, I generally try my luck with the top journals, and then I do go down the stairs. But, you know, what can you do if you want to get your research published eventually? But my personal experience is that over the years, you kind of find international journals that maybe don't even have a good impact factor, but they get very good exposure and they're very helpful. Then you can publish in those journals again. Then instead of just going for an international journal with a very high impact factor, which I'll speak about later, you know, where you're generally going to face rejection. So yeah, it depends on who you want to read your research as well. Local journals, some journals give you good readership, other local journals, you don't get good metrics at all. But if you can't get published in international journals, then you need to go descend the stairs and go for maybe other low-key international journals or national journals. I always go for journals as well that give me good reviewer feedback. You know, and I've had some journals that have really taken me under their wing, and the editor first gave me feedback and then reviewers. And so you get very developmental journals, and they're obviously good to publish in, that are really going to help you grow in your writing style. But it is important to obviously look at the journal's scope and audience. Sometimes journals include multiple topics, or a journal house includes multiple topics. So say, for example, Emerald. Now, there's a few journals I like in Emerald, and there's a few possible journals. Now, one of Emerald's journals could focus on developing countries. And so South Africa is a developing country. So when you write your article, you obviously need to give that article a strong focus on developing countries. And so you would, you know, throughout the journal, you would emphasize the words developing country, Africa, and emerging markets, South Africa. So that would be your focus. However, if on the other hand, now you get rejected by that journal, and now you're writing for the same stable, in other words, Emerald, so you don't need to change your referencing style at all. And now you're writing one that focuses on young consumers. So then your focus would kind of change a bit. You wouldn't emphasize the country, but you would emphasize the target audience, that the research was conducted amongst Generation Z or Generation Y, and you would mention words like young consumers, young, you know, audience, young target audience. So you would give it that flavor. So that's what I mean by multiple topics, that you need to emphasize what that journal scopes and aims are about in your research. And the example is like maybe one's developing countries versus the target audience. Even though it's the exact same research, you would place different emphasis according to the journal. Right. Also, I said examine the DOGT creditor journal list. So as I said, I placed this on Blackboard, the latest 2022 list. And I said Scopus already has 25,000 possible journals. DOAJ also has many, many journals. So sometimes you're fortunate enough to come across an international journal in a major stable that will give your work good exposure and doesn't receive thousands of submissions a year, which would increase your chance of getting the manuscript past the editor and into review, which I will talk about later as well. Getting past the editor is a problem. And then I also, as I mentioned before, it's also important to download the journal articles as examples and read journal articles from that journal to get a gut feel. And yeah, then also another element is look at the word limit. As I said, I struggle to write for journals that have a very, very low word count. So I like journals with 7,000 or more words, and you need to take that into consideration. And then it's sort of cut off a bit at the end, reviewer feedback and time period. Reviewer feedback, time period. So again, some journals take a long time to give you feedback, which we'll get to again later. So some journals take 6 months to get back, and you want to graduate and you need an article accepted. So you need to take that into consideration. Okay, just give me 1 second. The electricity's come back on, so I need to plug in a few things. So if you just have a break for 30 seconds, I just want to plug in what I can. So yeah, 1 second. Okay, I just had to plug in a few things there. Right. So journal metrics and measures is another important factor to consider, the journal's influence. So there are a few measures, and I'll just quickly give you the definitions, not that you may be, really interested in this, you just want to get an article published, but factors to consider, you will come across them. So what is an impact factor is the most commonly used metric. And this is the average number of citations per article published in a given year, which is divided by the number of citable articles over the 2 preceding years. So it's quite complicated, but so, you get a journal or impact factor of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. In my opinion, a journal with an impact factor, any impact factor is worth publishing in. Then you get this SCI or SC Imago Journal Index Rank, commonly known as SJR, and this considers the scientific prestige by calculating the weighted average values per article. Since sources transferred its status to other sites, other source that cites it. So basically what this is if other journals, big impact factor journals, cite another journal, it attracts some of their prestige. In other words, it helps their SJR index because other journals with high impact factors are citing from that specific journal. Then you get source normalized impact per paper, known as SNP, and this refers to the number of citations of a journal per article relevant to the discipline. And then you get a cite score, which is the average citations of a given year versus all of the papers published over 3 years. And Yeah. Then there's different journal indices, as you'll see in the DHET list. The most common indices is Scopus, ISI and World of Science, same thing, IBSS, Silo, DOAJ, which we already covered. So certain indices are more renowned than other indices. So IBSS and ISI are in my opinion, the top indexes, whereas the DOAJ and DHAT are generally lower indices and Scopus is somewhere in between. So again, which index the journal is indexed in has a impact. Right, so now let's talk about, we're drawing to an end. Now let's talk about the peer review process. In other words, what do reviewers look for? So generally they want to look at the highest quality manuscripts, which are innovative, unique, and have original research, and they are tailored to their journal scope and audience. And yeah, they want manuscripts that evoke excitement and interest from the journal, from the journals. So the major aims here are to attract the highest quality manuscripts, to improve the quality of the manuscript, thorough referencing. They want ethical principles, and right, editors and reviewers, what do they look at? Well, they look for innovative, unique, and original research. They look for clarity and significance of the research questions and objectives and hypotheses. So do they make sense? Apt methodology, suitable findings, and graphic presentation, as well as ethical issues. Those are the main aspects they look at. Just before I go to the review process, the editor-in-chief first screens all submissions and often rejects the manuscript without sending it to the reviewers. And this happens, I've had this where I've had certain paper rejected 5 times without it going to the reviewers. People just look at it and say, nah, and they can afford to do this because sometimes these prestigious journals receive 5,000 submissions and they can only publish 50 in a year. So they need to spare the reviewers. They can't send the reviewers 5,000 things to review. So they cut immediately. Just desk reject and send you a standard email. Right. Sorry, if you just give me 30 more seconds to do one more thing, then I'll continue. Right, it's great to have power again, but maybe some of you are without power. We're near the end of the presentation now. So So the review process. So if you get past the editor, in other words, after he's screened it and he doesn't reject it, sometimes the editor will ask for changes before he sends it to review. And I've had this as well. So, you have editor's reviews and then it goes to review. I've had this actually quite often. But if the editor feels that it can go to the review process after the initial screening, it's sent to anywhere to 2 to 5 potential reviewers. Now, these reviewers typically get 1 to 6 months to give feedback, but sometimes it can take even longer. Then what happens is you receive reviewers' feedback. Often the standard feedback is major revisions. Then the author needs to make revisions to this, and then it's sent back. And then sometimes again, you need to make minor revisions and it's sent back to the reviewers. They come back to you and eventually they accept it. And then after it's accepted, you need to make format, production, and further editing changes. And then eventually it could be published online first, what's called early cite. And then it could be even 6 months or a year later when the journal has space it gets allocated its volume and issue number, and only then is it considered your article to be published. And this process, my personal experience, can take, you know, some journals you can, from when you submit to when the article's published, can be 5 to 6 weeks, and others can be 3 years, particularly in the high impact factors, you know, going back and forth between revision until it's allocated the volume number. Until you allocated the volume and issue, you cannot claim the DHET subsidy. And I've literally, from when I first submitted an article to when it was finally published, I've had a journal that took 3 years for that to happen. Now, obviously, you don't have that time as a student, so you need to take that into consideration. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's just some of my personal experience. Then review waiting period. Now, this is problematic for students as well. If you want to graduate and now people are taking a year to get back, and a lot of journals take a year to get back to you. So that would not be the journal for you to submit your research if they're going to take a long time to get back, if you are wanting to graduate and you need an article accepted. And so the question is, if an article is taking so long, do I continue to wait or do I withdraw? So my answer is, well, it depends on how much you want to get published in that specific journal versus the number and quality of alternatives available. If there's not many other journals that you can publish in, well, then it's best to wait. And what I do, I suggest you send follow-up emails. So usually I send a follow-up email, and if I get no response, then I send another one the next week. And if I get no response, I send another one the next week. And I find everyone on that journal's site, and I email everyone until I get a response. You know, but if they get back to you, well, then you need to wait. And then I'll wait another 2 months. And if they still haven't got back to me, then I follow up again. So that's if you've got the time. But if there's a lot of other possible journals, then you can withdraw and submit to those other journals. But then you also run the risk is how quickly are those journals going to get back to you? So then you could land up with the exact same issue again. So my personal opinion is that if you get through the initial process and it's sent to review, I wait for that reviewer's feedback. I don't withdraw before I get that feedback. And I contact the journal every couple of months. And if I get no responses, every couple of weeks. And if I get no response, I'll send an email every single day until I wear them down, you know, and get some type of feedback where it is in the process. However, you can withdraw the manuscript. Yeah, and then withdraw. Another reason you could withdraw the manuscript is if you get feedback from the reviewer that you cannot change. So usually major reviewers' feedback is constructive, and you know, you make your major revision, then minor revision, and so it goes back and forth. But sometimes reviewers, you can't address their comments because, you know, they want you to change your methodology. They want you to all of a sudden to do quantitative research and you did qualitative research. So, you know, that's a problem. Or they want you to change your statistical analysis or sample size, which means you need to go and do more research. So, you know, that's sometimes then you have to withdraw the manuscript. But just to go back to this reviewer's feedback and constructive criticism. So, you know, so what you must do is you must address every single reviewer's comments, and then you need to write it up. So I use track changes or different color in the manuscript, and then I create a table, and in each comment I say, this is how I addressed it, referred to the manuscript, this is how I addressed it. So you're providing them with explanation. Sometimes also, they make comments that you have included, but maybe you didn't write it clearly. So in that case, you just need to acknowledge the comment and say, look here, here's some greater explanation, just to clear up that confusion. But do respond to all their feedback. Sometimes you may disagree with the comment, and then you can also just provide justification. but try and make a little change. So they would say, okay, we did this, we met you halfway, or we met you a quarter of the way. And usually they're just happy that you've addressed their comment, and then they usually let it go by afterwards. But it is key. And then when I resubmit the manuscripts, I submit a clean manuscript with all the changes, with no track changes or different colors. And then I submit it with track changes so that they've got both. Because sometimes it looks like a war zone. By the time you finish making the changes, it's hard to read. So it's nice if they have a clean copy as well. Okay, nearly on the last point. So open access, a lot of publishers are open access. You need to pay a page fee. It's good to publish open access because then anyone can view and read your article, and you get a pre-viewed exposure. Because CPUT does subscribe to a number of publishers and websites, you know, like Emerald and Elsevier, where we can get most of the researchers, but some journals have embargoes. So you can only get access to that journal 6 to 12 months later. And that's problematic if you need the journal article now. So it is good if you are able to publish open access. And then the last section to this presentation is dealing with rejection. And trust me, you know, I may have had 40 articles published, but I probably faced in those 40 articles about 80 rejections. So for as many articles I've got published, you can say at least 2 or maybe 3 or maybe even more rejections. Maybe it's I haven't counted. So you gain to face rejection. So as I mentioned, the editor-in-chief screens all submissions and rejects the articles before they go to review. So you just need to accept that rejection, but it becomes quite demoralizing when it's your 10th time you've been rejected. And I've had an article that's been rejected 10 times, and I've only managed to get it published, you know, to the 11th submission. The most common response that I personally receive, that as a standard editor, they say, this does not match the journal scope or is not relevant or original enough. So this is quite frustrating specifically if you selected this journal because you thought it was the perfect match, because you've used a lot of their journal articles and, you know, in your research, and then they say it's not, you know, not relevant. You know, it is very frustrating. There are other reasons. For example, the content is a reformation of what is known. In other words, your research is not original. They may consider your research to have major methodological issues. There may be poor, insufficient, or inappropriate statistical analysis. There may be a poor writing style, poor English, too many errors, doesn't adhere to the author's formatting guidelines, inadequate response to the reviewer's comments as well is another reason. And as I said, you have to remember that journals receive many submissions. Some receive 5,000 a year and they can only publish 50. So obviously the editor-in-chief is going to be very selective and only choose the most innovative, unique, and original contribution. Also, reject after review revisions. So sometimes 50 to 60% of submissions don't make it to review, 10% make it to review. And yeah, and you know, even after review, they can come back with reject as well. But even further, I once had a journal article which I made all the reviewers revisions and they were happy with it. And so it was accepted, except the editor then came back and said, sorry, your findings are contrary to this journal's viewpoint, so we're going to reject the article. So even after the reviewers have accepted your journal article, your article can still be rejected. And that's an extreme case where everyone's accepted it, except the editor says, nope, this is opposite to what we want to promote. So tough luck, we're not going to publish it. But what is important is from each reviewer's feedback that you receive, even if they're rejecting, often they reject your article, but they're giving you a lot of feedback. Then you implement all of those changes into the article as much as you can, and you submit to the next journal. They reject you, but they give you more feedback. Then you implement those changes and submit to the next journal. And by the time you've been rejected 5 times, your article is completely reformed, and sooner or later it will get accepted. And that is kind of how you grow. And I'm very thankful for editors that took me under their own wings and they mentored me and they gave me feedback before it was sent to review. I made those changes, they went to review, then I had major revision, then minor, and that was one of the articles that took 3 years to get published, and it turned out to be one of my best publications to date. That article's been read 110,000 times already, because of an editor that took me under their wing. So you do get developmental journals as well. And then just to finish off this presentation, Jalunga and Sarachu propose successful academic author traits. And to become a successful academic author, they say the following: readiness to adapt your research style depending on the task at hand, be able to immerse yourself in literature of your selected discipline, develop original ideas. It takes meticulous work and dedication to fashion a manuscript, show courage in subjecting your work to peer review, display confidence to establish an authoritative writing voice, exhibit persistence and resilience in the face of constructive criticism and rejection from editors and reviewers, and show humility in that not all of your papers will be similarly good. And then just lastly, all these references that I've listed in this PowerPoint presentation, for example, the Writing for Publication, this is a journal article, here's the YouTube video from the previous one, and lots of other authors, Elsevier, Fisher, Iowa State University, etc., are sources I used to write this. So you could go to these sources and look at them, and they would give you additional information. But the best way is to actually just start writing, find journals, download their author guidelines, and then start writing. And yeah, that was quite a long presentation, but I'm sure you're all tired. But are there any questions that you may have? You can just, all comments for that matter.
Thank you, Prof, for the detailed presentation.
Yes, Beatrice, we'll be speaking later because you are embarking on this process now as well. So thank you for the comment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, then I thank you very much. I hope you got something out of this. I'm going to stop recording this presentation.